Right, price card's not looking too bad. James is playing that Lillie's Clefairy or Slotbox archetype, and then Neddy Kosek is playing Dragapult Dusk Noir, which is going to be a very interesting match to see. Because typically, what James is playing is typically noted as a counterbox against Dragapult. But Dragapult having that Dusk Noir engine, allowing him to manipulate the prize trade, and might be able to take this home. Alright, NEOC finals coming in here. Just to run errands, benching Clefairy and attach, and that is the turn for James. Now over to Neddy. Starting a Pokepads. And Neddy will obviously look for some Dreepies to be able to put down, and hopefully gets an attachment for turn. Right, well, just looking at the deck, writing down some prize cards. And then Neddy will see that there's one Dracloak prized and double energy. Was it double energy or was it double Pokepads? Didn't recall. Alright. We'll see the first 3P coming down. And it's not easy having that Monkey Dory in the active spot, because that's typically one of those pieces you really need to counter that deck that James is piloting. And you typically don't want to overbench as well, because you're just helping Lillie's Clefairy build up more damage. And because of that Fairy Zone ability from that Lillie's Clefairy, that will be able to hit for weakness against the Dragapult EX. So the more Pokemon that are in play, the more damage this Lillie Clefairy does. But Dragapult typically wants a lot of pieces on the board to be able to get some draw in, as well as to be having some damage manipulation effects like that Dragapult's Cursed Blast, or that Dusk Noir's Cursed Blast. Alright, looks like Dawn is being played, getting that Dreepy as well as Dracloak and Dragapult. But there doesn't seem to be a Dusclops or a Duskull in play already, so Neddy won't be able to evolve instantly into that Dusk Noir. And funny thing is, with the pop of a Dusk Noir and a Phantom Dive, Neddy will be able to take a one-hit knockout on this Mega Kangaskhan. And that's something Neddy is eyeing up to do here. Although, James playing only double prize Pokemon as well as triple prize Pokemon like that Mega Kangaskhan, Neddy's prize mapping should be 2-2-2 here. Although James is playing some single prize Pokemon as well, be that Champao, or possibly that Passimian. Alright. There we saw the first knockout on the Dreepy from that Lillie's Clefairy, instantly applying a ton of pressure onto Neddy. Because now Neddy only has one Dreepy to work with. But Neddy placing down Pheasantipity to be able to use Flip the Script because a knockout has happened. And now Neddy can be very disruptive with that Crushing Hammer and Heads, instantly discarding some of those energies attached to Lillie's Clefairy. And James is not playing anything that can attach multiple energies, although there is the Crispin in deck, but Crispin cannot attach to Psychic Energy, although Lillie's Clefairy only needs a Psychic and a Colorless, means you can Crispin any two energies. But at some point, there are no more energies in the deck to be able to accelerate with Crispin. So James has to take note of that as well. Right, and Neddy playing that Lillie's Determination. And because Neddy's still on 6 prize cards remaining, Neddy will draw 8 cards from that Lillie's Determination. And that instantly sets up the board as well. Finding that ace pack unfast stamp is really good, as well as that Team Rocket's Watchtower. Because that Team Rocket's Watchtower will limit James from drawing any cards with that Mega Kangaskhan. And with that unfast stamp in play, James will only have 2 cards in hand. And if James does not find any energies, that Lillie's Clefairy is just going to be stuck there in the active spot. And that's going to give Neddy the time to build up his board state until he is ready to take some prize cards. Alright, what are the 2 cards going to be for James? Let's see here. Is it going to be an energy? Ooh, Kangaskhan Stadium? Although, you can bump the Stadium, retreat to Kangaskhan, and that will typically buy you a turn, but then you can't retreat multiple times in a single turn, so you can't take a prize card in the next turn. Alright then, Neddy found himself the Body Puffin, finding multiple Dreepy. And now the pressure is back over to James. Because there's no support in hand. And if no energy is found, then that Lillie's Clefairy will just be stuck in the active spot. Although, like I mentioned, James can retreat to that Mega Kangaskhan, bump the Stadium cards, but then that Mega Kangaskhan is stuck in the active. But it can take a hit from a Dragapult TX. That's also something to consider. Right, debating the oh yeah, the Ultra Ball. Because that Ultra Ball will get you some Dracloak next turn. Alright, what was the top deck? Oh, energy! Insane! Now James can still apply pressure. Although, with only 2 cards in hand, do you really want to have something going on? Nah, just take the knockout. Because they cannot unfast stamp 2 times in a row. And James drew that Meowth EX from the prize cards. That means James can find himself a boss's orders next turn. If no Dragapult is coming down this turn, there is no threat over to James's side. And then James can apply a ton of pressure over to Neddy. Right, and a Pokepad was found here. That's much cheaper than an Ultra Ball to be used to find yourself some Dracloak. Ooh, and there's the Handheld Fan. That's also a very interesting tech card from Neddy here. Because if your Dragapult gets hit, or any Pokemon with that 2 cards attached to it, you may move an energy card to any of those benched Pokemon. And that's going to be very disruptive. Right, Neddy found himself another Dracloak through the means of that Recon Directive, chose to play Pokepads to find yet another Dracloak to enhance the chance to find yourself a fire energy here. Or that might as well be the Crispin. If Neddy will play a Crispin, that is. Right, debating to use the Ultra Ball. Discarding that Handheld Fan. Obviously, James put down any Pokemon that can attack. So if a Handheld Fan would go down, all of those Pokemon would be able to attack with that energy card attached to it. And that is something Neddy has to consider as well. Alright, Lillie's Determination going down before those Recon Directives getting used, like I said, to enhance the chance of you finding that fire energy to be able to get those first 2 prize cards from Neddy's side. Right, so Neddy will see 14 cards here 12 cards, sorry. 4. Alright. Neddy is still on 6 prize cards remaining. So like I said, that Lillie's Determination will draw you a fresh hand of 8 cards and instantly finds that fire energy pre-recon directive. That is just insane. But now you can start build up the hands with those recon directives, finding yourself some pieces to be able to utilize next turn. Because what will really be useful here will be boss's orders to gust something up. Although, if you place 5 damage counters with that Dragapult on that Mega Kangaskhan, next turn you can pop the Dusclops, and then a Phantom Dive with boss's orders, and that grants yourself another knockout, and then you are on 1 prize card remaining. And obviously that other 1 damage counter can go on either the Wellspring Mask, the Pheasantipity, or the Latias. But Neddy is eyeing up different things here, discarding that Dark Energy and a Budgie to grab yourself the Dusk Noir. Although with Dusk Noir against the Lillie's Clefairy, and you gust something else up, that Lillie's Clefairy will have 60 damage remaining, so that's perfect math for a Dragapult's Phantom Dive counters. Oh, and instantly finding that boss's orders. That is a huge find for next turn. Alright, Crushing Hammer. Crushing Hammer won't do a lot here, so might as well just hold on for next turn. Because that Lillie's Clefairy is going down. There's no Lillie's Pearl attached to it, so that will give up 2 prize cards. And there's no use of using that Crushing Hammer this turn. Oh yeah, good catch from James. That Dusclops was already evolved this turn. Already placing down yet another Duskull, putting down a ton of pressure onto James's side. Alright, there we see the Phantom Dive coming in, knocking out that Lillie's Clefairy. Neddy takes the first 2 prize cards. But now debating where to place those damage counters from Phantom Dive. Looks like it's going to be the one on the Wellspring Mask. Oh yeah, it's going to be a split. There's 2 on Pheasantipity. Might as well be 2 on Latias. Or 3 on Latias. Yeah, it's going to be 4 damage counters on that Pheasantipity. Now, if that Pheasantipity has on 170 HP remaining, and that's going to be huge, because now Neddy doesn't need to gust something up, he can just use Dusk Noir on that Pheasantipity, place 5 damage counters on it, or perhaps boss's orders onto either a Latias or that Wellspring Mask, just ignoring that Mega Kangaskhan completely. And those will be the 4 prize cards Neddy needs to take the game. Right, that Dusk Ball finds you that Chiampao, but there's nothing else in the hand to launch off an attack this turn. Right, taking that Chiampao, and that's a good tech card in this deck, because it does allow you to remove the stadium cards, which previously allowed you to go very wide on the bench. When you bench that Chiampao, you can discard that stadium cards, and then your bench thins back to 5 Pokemon on the bench. And that is typically done when you want to get rid of some Pokemon that have damage on the board. But James does not have a lot of Pokemon in hand to be able to use that strategy. Although James can just get rid of that Pheasantipity, which is a liability for next turn, because Neddy is holding on to that boss's orders like we saw before, as well as that Dusk Noir, Neddy has game next turn. Right, what does it do, cards? It's another Crispin. Yeah, that's not going to do much. You can stall yourself a turn, but you need to get rid of that Pheasantipity now. Because James has the information that Neddy has that Dusk Noir in hand, as well as that boss's orders. Although, James does not know Neddy has that boss's orders. Yeah, because James played that Crispin, Neddy can just flash that boss's orders and tell James, like, look, I have game, let's go to game 2 here. Right, James attaching both energies to that bench Mega Kangaskhan, and that is just the pass. Alright, back over to Neddy. Evolve into Dusk Noir, use boss's orders onto Latias, and that's GG's. Neddy takes game 1 here, and we're going into a game 2. That's just a perfect execution of placing those damage counters, which Dragapult loves to do here. You can limit the HP of those easy support Pokemon which have 210 HP, so those get knocked out by a Phantom Dive next turn. Right, looks like there's some debate with the judges. How many cards Neddy has in deck? But I guess that will be all fine. Right, Lillie's Clefairy knocking out that first 3B. And then top decking yet another energy, which James could have used to knock out yet another Pokemon from Neddy's side. But James wasn't able to find anything after that unfair stamp. That stamp just stuck against James. And that was a perfect execution from Neddy. Alright, prize cards coming in here. Let's see what we have. Alright, James yet again going first, drawing with that Mega Kangaskhan, using Dusk Ball to look at the bottom 7 cards of your deck. That's a very interesting card, which was typically used after an Ino. But now with that special red cards in the format, where you have to shuffle your hands and put them on the bottom of your deck, Dusk Ball gains some new playability. Because if you have a ton of Pokemon in hand, which you had to use during your turn, Dusk Ball will be able to find it for you. Alright, James is seeing the play here, attaching to Pheasantipity, placing down that Latias. Are we going to see some Cruel Arrow gameplay here? Alright, and Neddy is starting off strong this time. Buddy Poffin coming down, placing 2 Dreepies on the bench. Ooh, and James prizing double Kangaskhan. 2 energies and a boss's orders. And Neddy prizing a boss's orders, Meowth, Dracloak, and a Buddy Poffin, as well as that Dusclops. Now, if this is a 2-1-1 line, and Neddy not playing any rare candy, Neddy will not be able to evolve into Dusk Noir this game. So Neddy has to take that in consideration here. Because you cannot simply apply pressure through those damage modifications. But that would also mean that Duskull is a liability, because it cannot evolve and only has 60 health points. Right, playing another Pokepad. Suppose we're getting another Dreepy, yes. I mean, there was a world Nady could have taken a Tricloak already, but having more Dreepy in play, especially if you cannot count on that Dusknoir, is going to be very good. Because if you see those pieces are prized, you have to go all out on Dreepy and Disruption to be able to buy yourself the time. Yeah, there we see the attachment onto that Duskull. Retreating into Budju. And then use Itchy Pollen so James cannot use any item cards. But I suppose James is holding on to a Crispin, and that will allow James to use Pheasantipity's Cruel Arrow to take some prize cards and apply a ton of pressure over to Nedy's side. Because if Nedy doesn't play any rare candy whatsoever, Nedy will have to evolve turn after turn. So that would mean Dreepy would have to become Tricloak, and then would have to become Dragapult. Oh, hello. Meowthiex will find yourself the Crispin. That is such an insane top deck. Yet again. James just has all the luck in this card game. Yeah, there we see it. Crispin being used, accelerating more energies onto that Pheasantipity, and then apply a ton of pressure. Looks like James is playing that Lily's Pearl. So those Lillie Clefairy would become single price attackers, and that is something to consider as well. But James did not find any that previous game. And that would offset the price trade even further. And James knows he can apply a ton of pressure, so he's shuffling very, very fast to be able to randomize his deck as fast as possible and take those knockouts, because there's only 50 minutes on the clock remaining. Right, the other energy is coming down onto Pheasantipity. As well as that Area 0 and the Dubs. As well as benching every single Pokemon James has in his hands. Alright, we're taking down that first Dreepy, taking the first prize card, and it's yet another energy. So if Nedy would play any Crushing Hammer, James already has an answer next turn. Alright, flip the script coming down here, and there's a special red card, but that won't be useful just yet. Because James has to be on 3 prize cards remaining to be able to utilize that special red card. Right, Pokepad is coming down here. Obviously find yourself another Tricloak, because Nedy needs them badly. And I suppose James is realizing there's no Dusclops coming into play. So James knows the pressure has to be applied onto those Tricloak. And because James has Latias in play, all of those basic Pokemon have free retreats. So even if Nedy would use a boss's orders to gust something up that would normally be stuck in the active spot, then that Pokemon can easily retreat because of that Latias. Because in this situation, because that Pheasantipity is taking prize card after prize card, you want to stall for time, because those Tricloak won't be able to survive very long. Right, Nedy finding the Crispin here. Might we see some Cruel Arrow gameplay in return? Nedy can already prep that Pheasantipity But because James's Pokemon are very high in health points, Nettie would need multiple turns to take prize cards. And that cruel arrow is only doing 100 damage. Alright, Crushing Hammer is big here. Nettie realizing that Dusknoir is going to do nothing this game. Right, Crispin coming down here. Although the thing is, when you apply energies onto your Dracloak, you know they're going to be sniped down by James. So are you going to invest the time in attaching to those Dracloak? Or are you investing the time to attach onto Fezandipiti, knowing that Fezandipiti is guaranteed to attack? Although you can't blame a man for trying. Right, Nettie is splitting those energies onto those Dracloak, benching the other Dreepy. And that's all he wrote. That's just going to be an Itchy-Pollen for 10. And then James has free play here. Oh, Nettie did find himself the Dusclops. So he is playing the 2-2-1 line. Right, so that is interesting. That makes so much more sense. A 2-2-1 line is much better than a 2-1-1 line if you're not playing any rare candy. Alright, there we see the Itchy-Pollen. Or not. There's no Itchy-Pollen coming down. That was just the pass? Oh, and James using boss's orders, gussing up that Fezandipiti, realizing Nettie needs an energy card to be able to attach, to be able to retreat that Fezandipiti, and that's going to be big here, because either those Dracloak need one more energy to be able to attack this turn. So what James is saying, I'm just forcing you to find a Crispin, or you're not retreating that Fezandipiti and attacking with the Dragapult. And because Nettie just said pass, James sniping that Dusclops, that is very big here. Because now Nettie is stuck with that Fezandipiti in the active spot, not being able to attack with the Dragapult unless he finds Crispin. But with 4 cards in hand, this is not happening. But because there's a knockout, the last turn, Nettie will be able to use this Flip the Script as well as double Dracloak. So there is a chance you can find yourself another Crispin. If Nettie plays 2 copies, of course. Because if Nettie only plays 1 copy, then Nettie is in big trouble here. Okay, you find yourself the Ultra Ball that grants you that Dragapult, but do you want to place this down already? Because a Dragapult will be susceptible to that Lillie's Clefairy, which is just chilling on the bench. For now, you need yourself an attachment onto that Fezandipiti to be able to retreat, and then you still need your Dragapult TX. And there's a Crushing Hammer coming down, but it's a Tails. Oh, and that Lillie's Clefairy is already prepped with a Water Energy. Another Crushing Hammer, and it's ahead, discarding that Water Energy, which was prepped from that Lillie's Clefairy. Now Nettie can already place down a Dragapult TX. And then stay in comfort, knowing that won't be gusted up and be knocked out by the Lillie's Clefairy. Because James would need both Crispin as well as Boss's Orders, and you cannot play 2 supporter cards in a single turn. So Nettie can safely evolve this Dracloak into Dragapult. But James is eyeing up different things here. James will be able to snipe that other Dracloak on the bench. And then the turn after, if Nettie evolves that Dreepy, then that will be the target for James. And that Fezandipiti will carry the game for James here. Oh, that Dreepy was put down last turn. Alright. Yeah, so that Dreepy will now turn into a Dracloak. Because Nettie does really need any resources available. Right, Recon Directive coming in here. Another Crushing Hammer, as well as Watchtower. That is pretty big here. But I would go for the Crushing Hammer. So James cannot prep that Lillie's Clefairy. Oh, debating that Watchtower though. Interesting. Right, special red cards cannot do anything for you just yet. Although you can attach Retreat into the Budgie and use Itchy Pollen this time instead of a pass. Right, James has to delete some Pokemon from the bench, choosing double Meowth here. And that is such good sequencing. And Eddie realized he did need to put down that Stadium card to limit that Mega Kangaskhan from drawing any cards if that Pheasantipity left the board. Right, Neddy did prep that Fire Energy onto that Dracloak. But Neddy did not have any Dragapult in hand, so Neddy does need to find a Dragapult, and those 8 cards he draws from that Lillie's Determination. Or Ultra Ball will do fine. Ultra Ball finds yourself the Dragapult. Alright, let's see here. Do we find it? There's no Dragapult, but there is Unfast Stamp, which is also huge. Because, oh, there's Ultra Ball. Alright, so that Ultra Ball grants you the Dragapult, and that Unfast Stamp will limit James from having any cards. And if that Unfast Stamp sticks, pretty much like the last time, then James would not have any cards in hand and unable to respond to any knockout happening next turn. Because that Pheasantipity is not retreating this turn, because the attachment for turn went onto that Dragapult. Right, so let's see if James would be able to draw himself out of this situation. With only 2 cards, that is not easily done so. Right, and Neddy finding yet another Dragapult for next turn, as well as that Night Stretcher. That Night Stretcher is going to be huge. You can use Budgie Boffin to place down their Duskull, use the Night Stretcher next turn to grab Dusclops back from the discard pile and evolve it next turn. So this instantly puts Neddy in a very good position, and James has to respond to that Unfast Stamp. And what do we have? We have a Lily's Pearl. We can attach it onto that Lily's Clefairy. But then an Ultra Ball. No, James choosing for that Cruel Arrow, taking yet another prize card. And now James is on 3 prize cards remaining. That would open up possibilities from Neddy to play that special red card to limit James to only 3 cards and already having in hand. That is huge. Right, so Neddy can attach onto that Dracloak, evolve it into Dragapult. But that would mean Neddy won't have any draw support next turn. So Neddy has to consider that as well. Alright, finding the Crispin is huge here. You can already prep that Dracloak instantly if there's enough energy cards in deck. Because you have to consider that as well. Because if there's only one type of energy card in deck, you are forced to take that energy card into your hand. Oh, there we go. Attaching Dark to Pheasantipity and Fire to Dracloak. That would mean you would be able to retreat that Pheasantipity while also prepping that Dracloak to attack next turn if that will become a Dragapult. Yeah, and this is big here, because Neddy did pass the turn some turns ago, there is not 10 damage onto that Pheasantipity, which would have allowed Neddy to be able to take the knockout on that Pheasantipity EX. But now that Pheasantipity EX would have 10 damage remaining.